All right, so I'll get started here. So, hi everybody, I'm your host Jeff from Arc. Thank you for joining us today for our talk on navigating tech hiring in an AI world, brought to you by Arc. So, Arc is an AI-powered remote job marketplace that connects great developers with companies all around the world. This event is partnered with Ashby, an all-in-one recruiting platform designed to help companies of all sizes excel at hiring. If you'd like to learn more about us and our Ashby, we've shared a number of links in the chat and the comments. So please feel free to take a look at them, click through them, and learn more about us. So today you'll learn actionable tips on how to use AI tools to help you hire faster and smarter and elevate your DEI efforts. So speaking of AI recruiting tools, Arc actually launched HireAI, a feature that's featured in TechCrunch earlier this year. So HireAI is an AI recruiter that gives you instant candidate matches without manual searching and or screening. So if you'd like to learn more about HireAI or even try it yourself, you can sign up from the link pinged in the chat. And to make sure we're helping you as best as we can, there's a Q&A in the tab, the activity panel at the right-hand side that we'll be using to source your questions. Feel free to drop your questions there and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. Also, don't worry about taking notes during the talk since we'll send you a recording after the event. And without further ado, let's welcome our panelists today. We have Shannon Ogborn, a community lead and RecOps consultant at Ashby. We have Mariana Gesto, senior talent recruiter at Pierpoint. And we have Matt Alder, producer and host of Recruiting Future. So instead of me telling you about their impressive experience, let's get started with a classic question. Tell me about yourself. Why don't we start with Shannon?
Sure. I am, as Jeff said, currently leading community efforts, as well as working with some of our customers at Ashby, which, as Jeff mentioned, is the all-in-one recruiting solution to enable talent teams from seed to IPO and beyond. In terms of my recruiting experience, I had an early enthusiasm for the recruiting space, starting from the very beginning of my career when I landed in internal recruiting at StumbleUpon, a company that no longer exists. I'm sure some of us have that experience of working for a startup that no longer exists. But that was my first dip into that. I previously have worked for several other recruiting tech companies, such as Hired, and I also worked in DEI staffing at Google. And I'm very passionate about unlocking the black box of recruiting strategy. And I recently launched the Offer Accepted podcast to bring more actionable and unique approaches for recruiting strategy to the recruiting community. So really excited to be here today.
Thanks, Shannon. And Mariana, why don't you go ahead next?
Sure. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been working in the tech recruitment space for 15 years now, which sounds like a lot. And I was lucky enough to join some trending teams across the world, globally, recruiting efforts for IBM, for Syngenta Group, most recently for Pierpoint clients such as United Health Group and TED conferences. It's been a very interesting journey in terms of getting to understand different scale levels of challenges that companies face in the tech space. And also, I feel super driven towards augmented intelligence, talent intelligence, and everything that has to do with how we read data, how we leverage our business decisions and help, drive more strategic workforce planning efforts, but also understand where talent is moving, where they are going, what they need and want. I'm a psychologist by profession and super passionate about everything that drives people to do their best work and also gets them engaged and motivated for it. So that would be me in a very, very tight nutshell. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Mariana. And last but not least, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Matt Alder. I run the Recruiting Future podcast. The podcast has been around for about 8 years now. And I think I have the luckiest job in recruiting because I get to interview two talent acquisition practitioners or leaders every single week. So we do 2 episodes a week. So over the last few years, I think I've spoken to 600 people leading recruiting in all kinds of different companies, in all kinds of different industries, in lots of different countries. When I'm not doing that, I do some consultancy around innovation. I've written a couple of books about talent acquisition. And before I started the podcast, my background was in recruitment marketing. So way back when I used to do recruitment marketing and digital marketing strategies for all kinds of different companies. But thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt. All right. So it's great to meet all our panelists today. Why don't we get into some discussion, some questions here. So we got, in the role of AI in talent acquisition, I got a question. I could direct this to Mariana, perhaps. How have modern recruiting technologies, both AI and non-AI, significantly altered recruiting, talent acquisition for tasks and responsibilities? And how has it freed them to focus on something more like strategy, for instance?
Sure. I think we have been seeing how a paradigm shift in talent acquisition is happening. It's towards augmented intelligence, not replacement, I have to say. But the advent of AI has revolutionized tasks that we previously considered as recruiters, and also the business saw them as time-consuming, resource-intensive. And now we're seeing how AI-based tools and enabled technologies are boosting our efficiency, are mainly reducing our time to hire, but they also bring their whole set of challenges in terms of how to regulate them, how to configure them, how to use them ethically. So there's a lot of exciting things coming up in our discussion around that. But in terms of efficiency, that it's kind of newfound, what I have seen is how it allows us as talent acquisition experts to engage more deeply in candidate relationship building, in strategic workforce planning, and everything that has to do with aligning our efforts with organizational objectives in a more lean manner. Spend less time in operational tasks that don't add that much value as of now, since AI can do it better and faster, and turn our capacities and our skill set towards things that remain indispensable, things that only humans can do well, like focusing on emotional intelligence, on intangible aspects of candidate evaluation, identifying nuance, cultural traits, and such things. I think that recruiters will be able to close the loop with hiring managers a lot more as AI allows us to, use data, show them KPI achievements, analyze quality of hire, so many exciting things that this allows us to do, as long as we use it, as I said, ethically. But that's more of a point of view. So that's where I see it.
Absolutely. Great insightful response there. Yeah, the introducing of AI, the introduction of AI definitely improves and makes a lot of processes more efficient. But we always got to remember there are certain aspects of the job that can't be done by AI, such as just making sure you're evaluating those profiles beyond the resume, personality, culture fit, and a lot of intangible aspects. So, thank you for that response. Why don't I direct the next question to Shannon? So, how do you respond to candidates who use AI tools during the job search and application process? Do you feel like it levels the playing field, or does it create new challenges for you?
For sure. This is an interesting question, and I've seen a lot of hubbub on LinkedIn about companies saying, don't do this or do this. And, there's always advice that's going to be on the contrary, on both sides. Personally speaking, I don't mind when people use AI tools, depending on what the circumstances are. If you're writing a resume, great. Use AI tools to help, get things a little bit more concise or synchronize things, writing a cover letter. A candidate is spending that's valuable time that they could have spent applying to more jobs if they would have had AI. Using it as a tool that you would in the job potentially as well. I'm all for that. And it shows a level of resourcefulness. As long as the person isn't misrepresenting their skill areas, I'm okay with it. That said, with the rise and organizations need to sort of decide their position on it. I think it's really important for organizations to decide their position on it and communicate it appropriately with candidates. For example, if you have a tech screen, you should communicate with the candidate if your organization does not want AI tools used for the screen and kind of act appropriately around that. I see it a little bit for some cases, again, back to the resourcefulness as using a calculator for a math test. You know, some teachers said, no calculator. Some teachers said, yes, who cares calculators, because you would have one in a real life circumstance. So I think the company really just needs to determine what their opinion on it is and really be sure to communicate with candidates on what their position is on that.
Great. Thank you for that response. Thank you. Yeah. Here, why don't we move on to Matt? So, Matt, what aspects of the recruitment should founders and team leaders pay attention to in 2023, especially when implementing all kinds of AI technologies, bouncing between automation, human touch, improving candidate experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting time, as everyone has kind of said, and I think that there is a balance here because we're really right at the beginning of this. Generative AI has kind of leaped into the public consciousness this year. Obviously, people have been working on it for a long time, and I know lots of vendors in the space have been incorporating it into what they do. But we're really very much at the beginning of the journey. So I think that people need to be doing two things. I think they need to be really paying attention to what this can do for them right now. And I think, there's some great answers about, bringing more humanity to the process and saving time and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think that we need to take a long-term view on this because it's highly likely that we're going to see some massive leaps forward in this technology. And at the moment, sometimes, using Chat GPT, for example, it feels a bit clunky and crude in terms of the interface you have to use. And I think if we fast forward, 6 months, a year, 2 years, this is going to be baked into what we do. So I think that the implications are enormous. So people need to be understanding what they can do with AI now to improve their candidate experience, to reduce administration and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think that there'll be some fundamental rethinking of how we do recruiting coming down the line. And I think it's important to have half an eye on that and be planning for that, because I think the companies that do that will be the ones that have the biggest advantage in, what are some very competitive talent markets that we're talking about, basically.
Right. Absolutely there.
Is it okay if I add something to that as well? And I completely agree, Matt. We're just kind of on the precipice of this. And one thing that comes along with that is a lot of legal stuff, a lot of laws coming into place. So I think one of the most important things that founders and talent teams should keep in mind is the legality of AI tools in recruiting. I know we have people from all over the world, so that's, if you're hiring globally, it just adds the additional layer. But for example, in New York in the US, a law has been put into place recently that states if a company uses AI to make hiring decisions in any capacity, so that includes application review, for example, they must inform candidates of this. And they also have to submit this information to an audit to prove that AI tools are not causing adverse impact on protected groups. And so laws are obviously going to vary pretty significantly by maybe even state, country. Sometimes even like New York City has different laws. And the last thing you want is to compromise your business because of a lack of awareness of the new laws surrounding AI. So that's the one thing that I always think of is like, oh my gosh, like what are the laws that are coming into place? Because I think we're gonna, as Matt said, we're accelerating in the next few years. I think the laws are going to accelerate and they're not always going to make sense because a lot of lawmakers, unfortunately, don't understand AI to the capacity that technical people do. So yes, you don't want to be compromising your business because of a lack of understanding of the laws.
Yeah.
And just to add that, Obviously, the EU is currently legislating in a similar type of way, and it'd be interesting to see how that rolls out and how that applies to different countries. I was talking to a chief people officer on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about this very topic, and the balance is obviously being informed of the legal process and not running your business into risk and things like that. But traditionally, HR in particular has been very risk averse and run away from anything like this for want of bringing risk to the business. But it is this balancing act, because you can't ignore this and just say it's too risky, we're not doing it. So I think that's a really interesting consideration in terms of how do you innovate and move forward and learn about this while keeping within what you say could be laws and legal frameworks that don't actually make sense.
Right. Absolutely. When we're thinking back, thinking really about AI, it's been less than 12 months that AI has really accelerated. I think it started at the end of last year when ChatGPT was introduced. So it's crazy to think of it. We're only in August. We're not even 12 months in, and there have been so much implementation, so many new innovative tools and solutions that people have created using AI. Which brings me to the next question is, and this question could be directed to anybody here. What's the most innovative AI tool or technique you've seen implemented in hiring processes or strategies across organizations today?
Happy to jump in. I've seen, from the early days at IBM when they were trying out Watson as a chatbot back then and running their first experiments, to nowadays HireAI, which is an amazing tool with embedded intelligence into it, to HireView for interviews, Eightfold even. I'd classify these tools in categories like, let's say, on one side, AI-driven chatbots, not so popular today. People don't seem to like too much to interact with a chatbot, even though they are a novelty still. But then we have those all NLP algorithm-based tools that get to be more accurate when it comes to candidate sourcing, resume parsing, etc. And now the latest in AI powered video interview platforms, something I have tried out. I sometimes help out startups and companies that are trying out beta testing new products. And I recently met with Trovinto, which is an amazing tool where you drop a job description and it gives you back certain questions that it suggests for you to ask depending on the skills you want to assess. And it gives you several options for each skill set. So it's amazing how you can tune that and calibrate it with your hiring manager until you reach the very good questions that will give them the information they need to understand if the candidates that are going to be debriefed later meet their main requirements. And this is super important when it comes to tech positions. As we all know, us recruiters might or might not be a technical person. So asking the right questions at an early stage makes up for everybody's expectations and alignments early on. It provides a better candidate experience too, and also allows us to match potential candidates that were not a good fit for that particular role with other opportunities in the company. So it's everywhere positive in that regard. And then we also have seen how other tools that are coming up more recently help us with predictive analytics. This is everything that has to do with how people are likely to behave based on past data that we can collect around them. And of course, our beloved Calendly and Chronify. I think that's a before and after for us recruiters. An AI-powered solution that schedules interviews for you. They still have a challenge though. I work with managers that are in different time zones, in different regions, and that's still a challenge for such tools, but they are getting there slowly. So I can expect to see this turn around in the next few months for sure.
I think there's to add to that, I think there's a couple of categories that that I've seen some really interesting things in. So the first one is interview intelligence. So I know there's a number of providers who work in this space. MetaView is the one that immediately springs to mind, where they are analyzing the text from interviews. So for example, if you do a video interview, it's taking that transcript, doing that across the business, and really analyzing to see whether there's bias, whether how well people are interviewing, looking at patterns, something that really kind of before the pandemic and before everything shifting to video, just wasn't available. And it's really interesting to see those kind of tools being used to teach people to interview better, to get better outcomes and all that sort of stuff. And then the other category that I think is really interesting, and it maybe speaks to the earlier question about people using AI to write their CV and apply for jobs and all that kind of stuff. I think we've seen a really interesting leap forward in assessment technology over the last sort of year or so. And I think there are some really interesting offerings out there that can assess people, assess people in really interesting ways to see, if they're the right fit for the job, that goes way beyond, CVs and interviews and all those kind of things that could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Could be slanted with AI and not be accurate. So I think that that assessment technology coming up at the same time that we're getting, all this other technology is a really interesting development. I think there's some great platforms out there with huge potential.
Yeah, Matt stole my line about MetaView. I have I'm just kidding. The really cool thing is that they just came out with more use cases for intake meetings. So when you sit down with a recruiter or someone else in your organization to talk about what what you're looking for, debriefs. And I think what's really interesting about something like MetaView is it helps put you in the direction of what actually happened, not what you felt happened. Because when you're interviewing someone, you could easily think to yourself, oh, I liked this person, so my write-up is going to be very, in that direction, regardless of their answers. And by seeing sort of, the concise notes and things like that, the AI is not making the decision for you, but it is helping direct you to make a better decision. And so that's what I really like about tools like MetaView. I'm very curious, Matt, as you were talking a little bit about some of the assessment stuff especially with resumes. It's pretty well known in IO psychology research that resumes are not a good predictor of job performance. So I'm just really interested and excited to see what evolves. The biggest predictors of job performance are general cognitive ability and some types of personality traits. So I'm just when things can get more predictive of job performance, everyone's just gonna scream in delight. I'm really excited about the evolution of that.
Yeah, that's definitely a very exciting part, and a part that maybe a lot of people haven't thought of before, right? Before AI was introduced. So excited to see a bit more of that. Why don't we jump into DEI? DEI and hiring, I'm sure it's posed a lot of problems and challenges for a lot of hiring managers. Shannon, why don't we continue the question? How would you implement DEI in your hiring process? And could you share an example of an initiative that you've led to improve diversity in your team?
For sure. So when I was at Google, I was on the diversity staffing team, most particularly working hiring women in tech. And also we were just getting into setting up some framework around hiring people with disabilities, which is a little bit more of a nuanced space, especially legally. AI was not super hot at the time, and also Google only uses internal tools. So they weren't just pulling in all these AI tools. But what I think is important for DEI implementation in to kind of understand here is AI or no AI, we should always lean on first principle and then use AI as a tool to make the non-human elements easier. And so when getting started with implementing DEI efforts, I have like a pretty strong recommendation to first really understand where your company is at, and then think about where you want to be and create tangible goals. Because one of the things that I find to be the biggest deficit or gap is that a lot of companies create goals that are not specific enough. So, for example, one of the top line goals may be increase diversity on engineering teams, but it's not tangible enough. There's no way to get from point A to point B. And so I recommend, in terms of implementation, first starting with where you have the biggest gap of current representation to market representation. And then you would be able to create a goal that says, increase Black representation on the engineering team from X% to Y%, specific, actionable, tangible, and very importantly, reportable. So you can you have access to report on that information. And that's a lot of the key of what I had done in previous organizations as well, is really making sure we understood where we were at and where we wanted to be. I talked to a lot of our Ashby customers who are like, well, we want to be at 50% representation women in tech. And when you look at the representation numbers, women in tech do not represent 50%. So you're really just going to be fighting a huge uphill battle. 50% would be amazing. I really hope that we get there, but that wouldn't be a realistic goal for the organization. So really setting yourself up for success, understanding where you're at, where you want to be, and create tangible goals around that, I think is really important.
Right, absolutely. And here's a question for Mariana. How do you ensure we don't inadvertently screen out diverse candidates based on a non-traditional career, the background, and any tips, when setting up filters or algorithms using the AI tools to make sure the screening is unbiased?
Thank you, Jeff. And it's a very good question in terms of everything that it entails. I'd say the answer is nothing but complex, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. I think that when we need to achieve fairness in candidate screening, we need to set up our AI-based tools in a way that allow for the most comprehensive talent pipeline to show up for us. And we've been doing this for a long time with our Boolean searches, which we built ourselves back in the day. Now we have AI tools that allow us to do that and do that for us. But still, we are responsible. I mean, it's not fair to say the AI did it. We are responsible for the way we build our own search engines, the way we X-ray, the way we do our work. So algorithm review, I'd say, is the basic first piece of it. Sometimes working with data scientists and people that can actually configure and reconfigure our tools is a second piece. I'm aware that not many companies are there yet. Sometimes they have they have these resources, of course, dedicated to other things, but we'll get there. And it's important that we think of this in terms of cross-disciplinary teams, that we get to, look at this together from different perspectives technically too, and also to make sure that the algorithms that are designed to help recruiters are focused mainly on skills and experience. That's when all of these things we can read about nowadays about moving towards skill-based recruiting has to do with this. It's no longer about the universities where they studied or sometimes the geographical location. If we are at a company that hires globally, for example, we need to make sure that we're not looking at the same cities, the same regions all the time, that we are really being open enough to consider candidates. And I have an example to share that was a surprise to me at the time when I was involved in this. And I think it illustrates this quite well. I was actually helping a client over a year ago to find some very specific competition data science winners in a very tiny location in California. And turns out that when I run my searches, all the results that came back to me were from people from a very specific part of Asia that had migrated to the US to obtain their MBAs there and had stayed. And they were like I remember now 92%. It was like super high. So I went back to my manager and told him, look, the only problem we got here is that they all look like this. What are we going to do about this? Because you already have this represented in your current team. And he worked with me to give me a very comprehensive list of universities in the desired location. I got that embedded into the algorithm and the configuration of the tool where I run my future searches after that. And that's where we came back with additional candidates that would have never shown up in the first try. So what I have to say is every time we can dive deeper, make another tweak, involve the person who knows how to do that, let's do that, because it'll allow us to get there more efficiently, to obtain a more diverse pipeline, and also to learn where alternative talent pools are located. After that, we could work not with an open rec, but work progressively in terms of a proactive approach when building future pipelines for similar positions. And it was a very, very unique skill set at the intersection of data science and healthcare. So it was very challenging to find those folks. When you identify where they get their basic training, what kind of path looks like for that persona, on average, you're better equipped to find them later. So yeah, just thought I'd share that. It was interesting.
Great example. I got a question for Shannon, but feel free, Matt, Mariana, you can respond to this one as well. So what would you think is the most important thing teams should focus on if they haven't implemented any DEI initiatives, especially for startups? Are there any AI tools out there that can help them build a framework or accelerate their efforts?
For sure. So starting as early as possible, implementing DEI initiatives is really going to be the key to success, because for every person you hire where you're not intentionally going through a framework that incorporates DEI strategy, you're setting yourself behind, and it gets harder and harder as things move on to make up the gaps. Not even just from a numbers perspective, but from an optics perspective. So a candidate, so say you're trying to hire more females onto your engineering team, you have none, and you keep hiring men, and then no females want to join the team because they don't see themselves represented in your team. So not starting early, and it's not to say you don't want to put quotas on it. That's illegal. Definitely don't do that. But the more that you build representation in your pipeline from the beginning, it's going to start to pan out that way the more you're hiring at volume. In terms of tools, there is a company called Matheson. They're a DEI intelligence platform. They help you do exactly what I was saying earlier, measure where you're at and generate priorities based on an AI recommendation framework. And then once you have a roadmap and a way to measure progress, as I had previously mentioned, you can track your progress over time. And the benefit of doing this at an early stage is that it allows you to focus on priorities that matter for your business, which is super important as a startup. We really can't tackle everything at one time, but we need to be intentional about the way we go about planning it. So when I was at Google, we had a very strong focus on Black, Latinx, and women in tech, but we had not yet started working on and this is for the US, for Indigenous folks in the US, as well as people with disabilities. And so we started creating those frameworks based on frameworks we saw worked from working with previous groups of underrepresented talent. And so getting started, I think you can't be afraid to fail. And I know that a lot of people see this space, as the DEI space, as like a little bit touchy and like, I have to be PC, and I am scared to do it wrong, so I'm just not going to do it at all. I really encourage everyone to take that leap of faith, talk to experts about it, bring in consultative people if it's necessary, but don't wait, because I think that is a really one of the most regrettable things that I hear from founders when they get to a point where they start considering DEI is that they wish their regret is that they wish they hadn't started it. They wished they started it sooner.
Just to add to that, I think one of the other kind of important things that maybe reflects back on what we were talking about earlier in terms of assessments and automated recruitment processes and things like that, is neuro inclusion. So I think it's very important that recruitment processes are inclusive from that perspective, because there is a danger that certain types of online testing or recruitment processes that aren't necessarily transparent up front could exclude neurodivergent people, which is a fantastic talent pool that people should have in their business. So I think that's a kind of a consideration when we're thinking about the actual kind of assessment and recruiting process here.
Yeah, and there's great that's such an awesome point, Matt. I'm very passionate about the disability space. If any people couldn't gather that already, there is an organization called Mentra that is essentially like a LinkedIn, but for neurodivergent folks. And so when you're thinking about, you're new to implementing DEI initiatives, look to the communities of the pools of talent where you're seeking, form external partnerships with companies like Mentra, with communities where you're trying to find people, and that's going to be a very fruitful way for you to dip your feet into starting those initiatives.
Yeah, I'd just quickly like to add that there's a difference when, as a talent acquisition partner, we work inside a company from when we serve them from the outside as an RPO provider, for example. And when you're inside, you get more direct access sometimes to that data points around how each team is built, where are the diversity gaps, where are the targets you might measure later according to your efforts. But sometimes when you're outside, you don't get access to that. So something that I've implemented that's super useful in these past years has been to, during the intake form, filling out and my first discovery meeting around the position, to ask my managers what are their diversity concerns in terms of their existing team. And that's when some very important information comes up. Sometimes they tell me, well, we have only women here or only men, and we'd like to see more of that, or we would like to bring in someone with this expertise, but from a certain different educational background, because we already have folks that come from XYZ. So it's really interesting to hear them out and also to make them mindful about the challenge and connect with them as partners on that solution. Because it's important for the managers to not feel that that's a problem that recruitment or HR should eventually solve. I mean, they can be actively building on that to bring it to a better status. And we can help them because we can bring them, the information from what's out there and what kind of people would like to join their teams or the position they're offering, and would also make for a different perspective inside the team, for, elevating the team's performance as a whole. We now know how that impacts the results. So it's also in our best interests to bring that information, regardless of our position, I wanted to add.
Right. Thank you for the insightful response regarding DEI. Shannon, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I just had, sorry, I'm very passionate about this topic. So I think one of the things I think most about when I think about DEI hiring and initiatives is thinking about the universal design approach. When you design a process that elevates everybody, it's going to have less adverse outcomes and impacts for protected groups in your countries or underrepresented groups, marginalized groups. And that's a lot of the things, I mean, this is just my opinion, and Mariana and Matt, I would be curious to hear your thoughts. A lot of things is just going back to first principle of like, what is the best practice, and then adding on the layers, because if your foundation is broken, your house is just going to sink into the ground. So really getting that foundation set up, like I hear a lot of founders say like, well, I just trusted my gut on that one. And it's like, okay, well, we shouldn't do that. That is not a good predictor of job performance. We should do structured interviews and sort of leading into that best practice direction, because that is going to lift everything up. But I don't know if Matt or Mariana, if you had thoughts on that concept.
Definitely do. And I've seen what happens when those foundations aren't laid out correctly from the get-go, for sure, Shannon. Back in the day, and I'm talking about maybe 10 years ago, we had a very major struggle in Latin America and some countries in terms of what we should ask candidates and what we shouldn't. Like, are you married? Is that a viable question? Things like that. And now we are, of course, after a very fast evolution, we're on a different page. But sometimes understanding why we are going to ask certain standardized questions to our candidates and what we expect, what information we expect to get back, how that information is relevant to the business to make a decision, and how those questions might be assessed from a candidate's perspective are all aspects that as talent acquisition partners we need to own. We need to own that. We need to really show our stakeholders what that looks like from the other side as well, because they are mindful about the brand, about the company's impact. So everything matters. It's not just about winging it. We need to be super responsible in that term, but also be open enough to ask the right questions the right way. And when we also consider cultural differences, sometimes a good question in the US could look a little bit different if we were to ask it in Portugal, let's say. And we need to somehow translate that to the local nuances, but always being mindful of what kind of answers we expect. Why is that meaningful to ask or not? Or if it's something we can, eliminate and substitute for a better question that will bring us more relevant insights for the business. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add very, very quickly, I agree completely with all of that. And I think that it's important to recognize that this isn't anything to do with the technology. It's not the technology's fault that this is happening. It's the attitudes within the business. And I think that, going back to that sort of first principles thing, really understanding as a founder how you think about talent and how you're going to work out what the right talent is for your business, how you're going to build a culture. And really, I think what this technology is doing now, it's allowing people to really challenge some very deep held assumptions about work that really fuel a lot of bias in terms of how recruiting is set up. So it ultimately comes down to how people think about talent, the importance of building inclusive and diverse workforces. And it's not, the technology is not going to do that without the right mindset within the business itself.
Right, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much for the response regarding DEI. I know it's a big challenge for a lot of organizations, and with the introduction of AI, creates more challenges, but also creates more opportunities for a lot of companies to seize that and drive their own DEI forward, especially at the startup stage. Now let's move towards the future of AI and talent acquisition. With the introduction of AI, I'm sure there's a lot of recruitment processes, there's a lot of roles and responsibilities that's going to be evolving from the traditional recruiter, traditional talent acquisition. Matt, do you have any insights into that? What thoughts would you have for that?
Yeah, this is the number one debate within the recruiting industry at the moment. What does the role of a recruiter look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 5 months' time? who knows? So I think that there's a whole spectrum of points of view here, from people who think that fundamentally recruitment is all about humans, nothing's going to change at all. People who really look at these tools and think, well, actually, we're going to become augmented and hyper intelligent recruiters and all those sort of things. And there is a school of thought that says no more recruiters because AI and automation can do this. So where we fall along that along that spectrum will be will be interesting. What I think we can be sure of, though, it's going to throw up a whole series of different types of specialism within recruitment, or roles for recruiters that they might not have thought of before. So, for example, experience design. How do you design, rather than just designing a recruitment process, how do you design an amazing experience, and using technology to do that, and perhaps using skills and experiences you already have within your business for designing products in terms of designing recruiting. I think the data is very interesting in terms of how much data we'll have and how do we tell stories around that data. And ultimately, I think, it's safe to say that recruitment is about humans persuading humans that this is the role for them and this is the company for them. So, things like storytelling and creativity and persuasion, critical. Now, will an AI be able to do that in 2 or 3 years' time? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. But what I would hope would happen is that recruiters will get the chance to really kind of show off their human skills and do the things that they do best, one-on-one at scale. And some of the the process stuff, it just gets smoothed out. And really, I really hope that this combination of humans and robots and AI and technology just really improves the candidate experience, gives people the transparency and the feedback that that they deserve if they're interested and have taken time to apply for a job in an organization.
Right, absolutely. Great response there, Matt. We have time for one last question before jumping to the Q&A. So I'll direct this question to anybody. So how do you envision AI reshaping the candidate's journey, expectations during the recruitment process in the next 5 years? Nobody can really tell. Nobody can see the future for what's going to happen with AI in the next 5 years. But how do you envision that changing with the candidate's journey throughout recruitment processes for various different sizes of companies?
I think that there's a lot that can be done behind the scenes that don't require human touch that candidates really appreciate. We already see this in things like someone sending a booking link instead of going back and forth like, oh, that time doesn't work. Can you do this time? Oh, I actually have a meeting at that time. So we already see some of these conveniences for candidates that they really enjoy. But I do think, and Mariana, I think you had mentioned this earlier, like, people can at this point tell like when it's a chatbot, when it's a robot, and they're like, why aren't you remembering what I'm saying? Why aren't you getting this right? And people get frustrated, which we don't want people to be frustrated in our candidate process. And like Matt said, like, who knows, in 2 to 3 years, maybe you can't tell the difference. It's kind of hard to say, but I think candidates will always appreciate a person taking the time with their candidate experience. But they also appreciate the conveniences that AI, I think, will afford. And it's going to be a learning experience for the entire industry, founders, recruiters, candidates, and we're all going to be learning and growing together, which is exciting, but a little bit scary. But I think that balance moving forward is what's going to make a candidate's experience really good, or make it seem like the company is so far removed from the human aspect that they're not actually interested in the company.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I think the great comparison here is planes can actually fly themselves, but would you get on a plane without a pilot? I think that's the that's the thing, is that level of human comfort. I think that what's really interesting is, I think if you look at recruiting in kind of adjacent industries and in other areas, then if you look at frontline, high volume, hospitality, retail recruitment at the moment, because speed is so important in those industries, there's a lot of automation already. So a lot of use of chatbots and auto scheduling and all those kind of things. And the companies that are doing that well are literally just getting the right candidates in front of human people to interview them much quicker, to the benefit of everyone, to the benefit of the business, but also to the benefit of the candidate, because they get a very quick response in terms of what's going on. So I think there are definitely things that you could learn in tech recruitment from what's happening in other areas of recruiting. And at the moment, it really is that kind of frontline hiring where automation is probably at the most cutting edge, I think.
Totally agree with what you both said. And I was going to add how the human touch is the irreplaceable ingredient of a great candidate experience. So I'm kind of foreseeing how moving forward, it's going to be a lot of discussions about how you design a process that is intuitive enough for the candidates to feel that the process is about them, as opposed to something foreign, robotic, and totally unpersonalized that's dealing with their concerns. We are all tired of reading posts that are nefarious about, experiences when seeking for a job. Nobody should go through that. We know how hard it is to seek a position. People should be really matched right away with the right kind of roles for them, whatever they are, however they want it, regardless of their expectations and everything else. Those are conversations to have later. So seeing how discussions around a new process design are ripe for happening, have been for a long time, and now we'll get to see how that shapes up. But also, in terms, Shannon, of what you brought up, I was thinking of how at which steps of the recruitment process there should be a hybrid integration between AI and the human aspect, and which steps should be handled 100% by a human recruiter. And maybe that's where the magic lies, how you build that for it to be intuitive enough, fast enough, but also personalized enough and fun. I'm also thinking about assessments, about skills-based sometimes training to see how the candidate responds or what their approach to a certain problem-solving challenge is. That can be fun. That can be gaming-like. It doesn't need to be boring and old school. It can be super interesting to tune that up to make people feel that they are having an experience around seeking their best position out there, and not so much as going through a process, filling out a form in an ATS that might not be getting the keywords from the resume and then getting paranoid around that. I wouldn't wish that for anyone. And we have the chance now with the tools that are coming up, and we will even have more so, to build amazing experiences. But it requires creativity, it requires empathy, 90% of that for sure, maybe more. And it requires people that can think of themselves on the other side of the experience. People that can maybe remember when they were seeking a position or even feel what the candidate feels. I see that's where we're headed. Let's see what shape it takes. Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, I know you got to run. Well, we can finish the Q&A in a few more minutes after you run, but
yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. Sorry, I've got to leave. I need better AI to manage my calendar. That's all I'm going to say. Great discussion. Thanks everyone. And I look forward to watching the recording and hearing the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you again. All right. Why don't we jump into some Q&As? We got a few minutes left. We've got a first question here from Joe Kahi. What characteristics might predict a more successful candidate after hiring? And what are those characteristics easy to obtain? Where do they come from? Shannon, Mariana, if you'd like me to repeat the question, either of you could respond to that. Feel free to do so.
So one of the focuses I think that's coming up a lot recently is a metric called quality of hire. Every company is measuring this differently from the customers, our Ashby customers. So I work with a lot of our analytics customers and have been trying to understand how people are using quality of hire. They also then try to backtrack that and say, well, what qualities does that person have? And so there's things like, performance ratings and things like that. But what stands out to me is that a lot of these things are probably not that helpful in being predictive yet, because you're still using very biased systems like performance reviews. Like if your manager doesn't like you, even if you're a top performer, you may get a bad performance review. You may leave after 6 months because you decide to leave because the culture is not a right match for you, and all of these things. So that's the quality of hire is and Mariana, you may agree here, it's a huge topic of conversation recently, but I don't know that we've necessarily like resolved that. The issue with taking a profile that has a high quality of hire and backtracking it, and Mariana, you had actually mentioned some of this before, is that you may end up with profiles that are all the same, and so that really does hinder your DEI efforts. So it's a balance there of predictive but also understanding and checking, like you had mentioned earlier, that you're not creating a homogenous group of candidates for the future.
Absolutely. And amongst the lines of what we were discussing a bit earlier too, around this question, I'm not sure we'll ever be able to come up with a tool that does all the predictive hiring in terms of quality of hire, and that's 100% accurate in that regard. It's more like the shape that this is taking. It's maybe we have a resume, the tool goes over it, and it alerts us where the data points signal that this person should be asked more about what engages them for the longer term in a position, what kind of challenges they would like to encounter in their next role. More future-oriented than past-oriented is the way I see it. But sometimes even when we ask questions on an interview that are around SMART goals, and we really track what achievements the candidate had objectively in their past positions, like did they drive higher ROI, how much, were the sales quota obtained, how so, what actions they took, whatever. More data-driven, we might get more objective information around how they reach their goals. That, again, is not predictive of the future 100%, but it will signal what kind of candidates have a higher possibility of being a good match to a certain company's culture. They're all different too. I mean, it's really complex what we're talking about here, but I don't think there will ever be a tool that can 100% rule out anybody because of that. But I do see a tool that signals to the recruiter, ask them more about this or that to make sure that they are a good fit. That's where I see things going.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana. All right, so that was a great question. There are actually a couple more questions we weren't able to get to, so we're going to wrap up the talk here. We're actually, approaching just the hour. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out to our panelists after the talk. And I want to thank everybody for joining. We've learned very helpful advice from our panelists today. This is the end of our talk, but feel free to follow them on their social media channels. We've left links to their in the chat. There's also a networking space on the left sidebar if you'd like to connect with other professionals who, like you, are interested in learning more about AI hiring strategies from our panelists today. Feel free to jump over there to start a conversation. And as a thank you to all of you who joined this event, we're offering a 30-day free trial of HireAI Lite, valued at for $399. Just fill out this quick survey at the survey tab in the activity panel on the right-hand side and let us know you're interested in it, and our team will follow up and get you set up. So thanks again, Mariana, Shannon, and everybody that have attended today, and see you next time.